Welcome everyone, and we are going to spend a little bit of time today talking about professional boundaries. I've kind of got some notes up here on the board just to kind of give us a guideline of where we're going to go. But I want to just start out with a question of what do we mean by professional boundaries? When we talk about professional boundaries in the field of counseling and substance abuse, what kind of comes to mind for you?
Boundaries between ourselves and our clients.
Absolutely. Our ultimate goal as clinicians, of course, is the first rule is to do no harm. And so for each of you, whether you're working on substance abuse or counseling, you have a code of ethics that you should know and follow. And definitely we want to talk about professional boundaries between ourselves and the people who we work with and the clients that we're working with. So not just our clients, but also our colleagues.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to have some real clear guidelines for ourselves about what that means. And so if you can, Bill, just kind of expound upon when you say between ourselves and our clients, kind of give an example of what might be a boundary that you would be careful to cross. Oh, actually, we have another hand up in the back. Laura?
Some of our clients, majority of them are men, and they can get a little flirtatious, and they ask you out.
Mhm.
So you have to set that boundary right there with them, even if you present yourself to be professional. And another boundary is money-wise.
Mhm.
Like if they want to, sometimes they, because we're nice and professional, they want to offer you money. They may, well, thank you so much for all you did. I'd like to give you $20, or I want to give you a gift, and you can't accept that.
Absolutely. And Laura brings up a really good point. One of the key components, and you'll probably find it in all of your ethical guidelines, is about gift giving or what you can and cannot receive. So from a professional standpoint, right, we want to be professional. And that includes our dress, that includes our demeanor, that includes professional space. So all of us have space boundaries. So we want to be real clear with our clients and with our colleagues about what's comfortable for us in terms of professional boundaries. And so you may need to have a crucial conversation with someone about what that looks like for you. You know, for some people it's hands length. For some people, they don't mind people getting this close to them. So I think it's really, really important for us as clinicians, one, to know what our own professional boundaries are so that we can help others not cross our professional boundaries and then we don't cross there. Another good point that Laura brings up is people wanting to give gifts or money. Typically in the field of counseling and substance abuse, that's a big no-no. You should never accept gifts, and you shouldn't give gifts. But one thing that comes into mind when we talk about gift giving is cultural diversity. Some cultures will find it offensive if you don't accept a gift. And so what might you do? So if a client, and you know their culture and it's part of their culture to, really give you a gift, how might you respond?
I would think you would speak to them about it, and like tell them how much you appreciate them wanting to give you a gift, but you can also let them know that you're bound by the structure that says that you can't receive a gift. Let them know that giving a gift is not appropriate for that setting, but you want to thank them for the generosity and wanting to give you a gift.
Absolutely. And so, you just want to be real clear with your clients. You really do appreciate the fact that they are willing to give you a gift. However, you are bound by certain ethical guidelines and expectations for your employer and yourself that you're unable to accept the gift. Sometimes what people will do is they'll accept the gift on the behalf of the agency. So if someone brings you cookies or someone brings a flower, you can say, I'll accept this on behalf of the agency, and they put it out for everyone to share. So then it's not you personally accepting that gift, which is another way. So then you don't make them feel less than because you weren't able to accept something that they found. They were just trying to show their gratitude for what you have done for them. So that's one kind of way to address it as well.
Well,
I think another issue or a boundary that we typically get with our substance abuse clients, sometimes they might need rides. So I know that's a tough one, and for us as professionals, we can't go past that boundary, but we should, you know, when we address it to them, like, hey, I can sit and maybe wait with you, but I'm not obligated to, you know, give you a ride or take you to the bus stop or anything like that.
Absolutely.
So that gets a little sensitive too sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sharon?
And it also depends on the type of service you're providing. For instance, maybe I do some work on an ACT team, and transportation is one of the things that we provide for the people we support. However, I have to be also mindful of the other boundaries, you know. So, for instance, I took a young man to a job application. He wanted to put in an application for a job. And you can get really comfortable in different settings, you know. So we're driving in the car, and I'm asking him, I'm doing an interview while we're riding in the car because he had just gotten out of the hospital. But then he asks certain questions that cross a line of disclosure for me.
Okay.
And so just being mindful of the professional boundary while still making him feel important and comfortable, you know, that was something that was on my mind as well.
Right. That's a really good point. Yeah, because transportation could be part of the role that you're performing. And so I think when you are talking about professional boundaries, another important thing to do early on is to clarify for your client what, you know, their role is and what your role is as a professional. And so then those boundaries don't get crossed, so they know that transportation is a part of your role. However, you know, me talking about my personal life isn't something that we're going to do because I'm here for you. And we're going to talk about what you need. So excellent point.
That's what I was going to say about the boundaries. I get a lot of personal questions because I am perceived as young, and you know, they want to know my age, marriage, you know.
You are young.
You know, kids, that type thing. But that's one of the boundaries that is always, you know, and sometimes I've learned how to address it, but it always comes up, especially dealing with adults.
Okay. And one of the other things that might oftentimes come up too is, especially when you're working with the substance abuse population, is, are you in recovery? And so I think when we're talking about personal and professional boundaries, you kind of have to do like you do. You almost have to kind of practice what you're going to say. Well, know what your position is first, and then practice what you're going to say, and then that's kind of your blanket statement as you're going along. Because people try to deflect, you know, what they're there for and kind of put it on you, when we really want to bring them back to, we're here to help you and your, you know, what you need right now in this professional setting. Sharon, you had something?
Yes, I just wanted to build on that. I get that a lot too. And I have one individual that he crosses boundaries with any female that comes in to help him. And what I found is we have to repetitively cover that with him. And I'm firm, I'm fair with him, I'm respectful of him, but I have to handle him very firmly because he will try to cross that boundary. And when he finally realized, okay, I can't have this conversation with her, well, do you have any friends? Then we had to address that. And so it was a constant thing with some clients, and they may be male and female, not just males who may want to cross a line, and being prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sharon talks about being fair and consistent, and setting clear boundaries and doing that on a consistent basis. So, you know, as long as you're consistent, hopefully most clients will kind of get where you're going, and then they may settle down or move on to another issue that you can help them address.
I have I guess a tough boundary for me. I deal with adolescents, and sometimes I build good connections with some of my clients, and especially when they do succeed and show progress. So the service that I do is only 6 months max. So after they are discharged with success, sometimes they'll like still want to call to give me updates or just to say, hey, I miss you, and I don't answer. But I always feel, I guess I feel a little like I'm kind of letting them down because I didn't want it to make the client feel like I was only here for just that period of time, or just to
Okay.
get paid because they like to reference that. Like, so I guess that would be a topic or something.
Absolutely. So what do you guys think? I mean, I think there's this very thin line between, you know, when you're actually working with a client, which is a good place to go, or when they've been discharged from your services, can you or how do you continue a professional relationship if they're no longer in your service? And most of, all of actually, your ethical guidelines will have some criteria in terms of when you can have different types of relationships with clients after the service is done, or can you? For me, once a client, always a client. That just makes it really clear for me, and so I don't have to think about whether it's, I think the North Carolina Substance Abuse Professional Practice Board is 5 years, the LPC has another guideline, the LCSW has another guideline, but for me, once a client, always a client just makes it really clean cut. So I think you have to figure out what works best for you.
Yes, you know, I agree with you on that. And you're right, depending upon what's best for you and what's best for that person, and properly preparing them for termination.
Yes.
You know, early on from day one.
Yes.
You know, so this is not a lifelong. This is temporary. It's not going to
Yes.
last the rest of your life. And preparing them and reminding them that at this point in time, at some point in time, we're going to be, you know, cutting this
Our
relationship off.
Mhm.
And if, even with referrals, still following that person, make sure it's a seamless process.
Mhm.
When I was in corrections, the youth that I served, youth develop relationships with you.
Mhm.
When they find you're somebody they can trust and you can depend on, they cling to you.
Mhm.
And helping them to understand, once you are released from here, that's it. That's very challenging.
Absolutely.
Seeing someone on the street that you serve,
Right.
handling that a certain way,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So preparing them
Yes.
for the time, because the time will come when you will no longer be in service, and how is that going to look, and how are we going to handle that?
Absolutely. And connecting them to natural support.
Yeah.
So that they have other resources that they can touch base with when you're not the, you know, first point of contact. And again, Sharon made a good point. When you see them in the community, you know, how do you address them? When do you address them? I had an example just the other day where a client just kind of kept looking. I know you.
Right.
Where do I know you from? You know, and I said where we knew each other from, but I was not going to approach him first. It is unprofessional when we're in this field to kind of break their anonymity or, you know, violate their privacy. So it's best if you let them approach you first, and then the conversation is very short. Hi, how are you? How are things going? Good to see you're doing well, and then you move on. And so just kind of learning those boundaries, I think, is really important. Monique, you had something?
Oh, no, I was just gonna add to Ms. Sharon, just making sure you keep the, they call, just making sure you keep the phone call professional. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes the client might wanna get into person, just, oh, how was your day? What did you do the weekend? You know, stuff like that.
So-
Just making sure you keep it focused on the client.
Yes.
And, you know, and not on yourself. And that conversation can end quickly because sometimes they don't like to, you know, disclose
This is
too much
going-
information
yes.
about themselves, because they just wanna pretty much call and see, you know, check on you, but just pretty much keeping it professional.
Absolutely.
Just cutting it. Even sometimes if they are going on, well, hey, I'm either at work or, you know.
I have to
I'm-
take another phone call. So be creative, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you need to make it very clear about, you know, what the phone call should be about. Sharon?
That's good. A recent experience I had, I was doing an assessment on a client here.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to the substance use section and we went over marijuana, I mean, he lit up like a Christmas tree. He was so excited. He hadn't used now, according to him, since 1997. But it brought back some memories for him, and he was naming all. Well, you know how it was back in the day, he's telling me. You know how it was. We had all these different types of weed we could buy. And I looked at him and said, really, well, how was it? You know, I didn't say to him, yes, I do remember how it was. You know, I did not affirm what he was trying to get from me.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, how was it? You know, he said, well, we had this to pick from and that to pick from, and Arkansas Red. And I said, well, what is Arkansas Red?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and just protecting, you have to really be quick
Yes. Quick on your feet and be able to respond in a professional manner and making sure that you're getting them back on track so that it doesn't become about you. The focus, the session is continued and stays on the client, which can be really tough sometimes. So you gotta have some strategies. In those agencies where you're actually out and about and you have to use your own personal phone, you have to use your own personal car, and sometimes they ask you to give out your personal cell phone number so that people can get a hold of you. You know, after hours, you have to have boundaries for yourself in terms of when do you shut off the phone.
Listen, Yvonne, can I say something there before you go
Absolutely.
to another point?
Mhm.
Just yesterday, you know, some clients will connect with you better than they do someone else in your agency. So this young brother, because I worked with young people, I have an affinity with them. Well, Miss Sharon, what if I need to just talk to you? I can't call you because your phone is blocked. So I said, well, you can call the office and they'll call me and then I'll call you.
Yes.
Or you can call the crisis line if
Yes.
it's after hours. They'll call me and I'll call you. So when you see the
Absolutely.
private number and I leave you a message,
Uh-huh.
and I'm gonna call you right back, pick up. Cause he wanted that
He
number.
wanted that cell phone number.
And that's a big mistake.
That's a huge mistake. And sometimes we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble professionally by really crossing those boundaries. So we've got to be careful. We have to protect ourselves. One thing that you do have for yourselves as clinicians is your name, your reputation, and your license. And so you want to really, really be careful not to cross those boundaries. And use supervision. Use each other. Use your peers to really talk about those specific instances or situations that kind of make you feel kind of queasy and uncomfortable, so that you don't get yourself in a situation that you can't get yourself out. Hold on, you guys.
Okay. Oh no, my question was, I do have a thing with that with my cell phone. It's mine. It's my personal cell phone. I pay my personal bill. But of course, some agencies, want you to give out your cell phone. So I'm not sure how to, address that because I am, clients start to get attached and they do want to call and, ask, personal questions and stuff like that. But how can I ever say I don't want to give out my cell phone or I don't want my cell phone on the PCP?
That's a really hard one, especially if it's an expectation of the agency. I would hope that in this day and age that most agencies would be able to provide you with what you need. But unfortunately, of course, with the whole mental health reform, they can't. And so, again, I think something like Sharon is doing where you're using the blocked number for certain numbers, and so then you just get the voicemail, and then you can call them back, might be really, really helpful. Or having them call the agency if they have this on-call responsibility, and maybe then they can call you, and then you can call the person back. But that makes it really difficult when that's an expectation of the agency that you use your own personal phone for client calls. One other thing that I found, you got one too?
My manager taught me I have a Google number.
That's what I was just getting ready to
Google
say.
number, and that's what I use.
And it's free, right?
Yes, it's free, because sometimes my number can go to our number, but like if I'm on the road and I don't want to do that, I just call them from my Google number
Okay.
and everything.
You can set it up right through your own phone, right? Well, it'll send you a message saying. So there are some strategies out there that we can use because, like you guys said, one of the most important things that we do is we build relationships with people. That's what we do. That's what our job is. We're in the helping profession, so we have learned how to be responsive and meet people's needs, and we build relationships. And so, of course, some of our relationships are the best relationships they've ever had with anyone.
That's right.
And so then we've got to figure out how do we transition that relationship from us to some other natural support in the community that they might have. And it might take some digging, but it's something that we're obligated to do. Sharon, you had another point?
That's excellent. And some agencies will give you a phone stipend.
Oh,
I don't know if yours does that. And you can get just a cheap phone to use.
Like a track phone or
A track
something.
phone or something like that. Some of my coworkers do that.
Mhm.
I'd rather use that toward my phone bill. So I can star 6, 7 and dial the number. But that's another option too. But when you talked about using peer support or supervision to process comfortable situations, I've done that a lot because even though I've been in the addictions counseling field, I still become I'm very sensitive to the pain of addiction in people's lives.
Absolutely.
And so if I'm touched by a case in a very strong way, I've learned to process that right away. Because to look at a female in particular, look at her, to see the pain of addiction on her, to see how it's just worn her body down, and that's very difficult for me. I don't think I'll ever get over dealing with that.
Absolutely.
And then I went to a lady's home the other day who was very beautiful when she was younger. She's 60 now, she's not old, but she was traumatized by a sexual assault, and it caused her to go through extreme depression, and she's afraid to leave her home because the perpetrator lives a couple of houses down from her, which is crazy difficult. And so I went to her home. She lived in Paris. She's a jazz singer. I mean, beautiful. She puts on this tape of her performing. I mean, her condition is so bad. Her house is full of dust that's about at least, this thick. She's sleeping on the same sheet she slept on for years. She takes me in her bedroom, shows me her bed. I'm trying to mask how I feel, thinking, oh my God. We got to get this lady some help.
Right.
And her dog, she has a dog who is her companion, but he's ungroomed, and she needs someone to come in and help her. But when she put on this tape of her performance in Paris, I saw life come into her. And it affected me. I had goosebumps. It was just so powerful. The applause she received from this audience, and you could tell they were giving her a standing ovation.
Okay.
And it touched me, and I had to hold back tears because I saw how it affected her. And I had to, as soon as I left out of her house, I had to call somebody and process that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because then I was still like, And so, I just wanted to support what you said, how important that is.
Well, because you guys are taking on other people's traumas all day long, every day. The people who we work with have been traumatized. And we take on that trauma when we work with them, even though we may not realize it. And so, yes, you need to have someone who you can kind of bounce things off of, share information. If something makes you feel really uncomfortable, if there's just a really strange situation that happens that you need to kind of process with somebody, that's what ongoing clinical supervision is for. And so even for those of us that become licensed or become supervisors, I know for me, I still have 2 colleagues that are psychologists that I touch base with on a regular basis, because it just keeps me fresh and it keeps me clean and kind of gives me a place to just kind of work things out that might seem really difficult. So I think that's important for us, that we don't lose focus, because we always need some type of clinical supervision so that we can kind of process through the trauma that we're exposed to by helping other people who have experienced trauma.
And Ms. Yvonne, it could also trigger something in our own lives.
Absolutely. Yep. And that would be the transference or the counter-transference.
Yes.
So we really need to be careful, and that's also, a professional boundary issue. Making sure that when you're working with people, right, if it triggers something in you, what do you do with that? What do we do as helping professionals when we're experiencing trauma of our own because we've been in a situation or in a counseling session with the individual who really touched us deeply because of some situation we've had ourselves? Hopefully, all of you, or if not all of you, or if you need to, there are things like EAP, employee assistance for professionals. There's counseling for yourself, and a lot of times professionals are uncomfortable with counseling. But if you're counseling individuals and you're giving of yourself all the time, you've got to find some ways to do some self-care. You have to be able to do some kind of self-care. You need to be able to identify stress in yourself and also in the people who you work with. So if you can identify what their triggers are and what kind of stress they experience, you also have to be able to do that for yourself. So you need to be able to figure out what are your self-care techniques, strategies. For me, I like to be by myself. I need to be in a place where there's no TV, there's no phone, there's no people, there's no anything, because it gives me an opportunity to re-energize. So, take some time to really kind of identify for yourself what might be a self-care. And you almost have to schedule it.
Right.
Because otherwise you don't do it. Helping professionals are the worst at self-care, because we're always used to giving of ourselves, and we have to remember to give something back to ourselves. And so whether it's reading a book, or whether it's swimming, or whether it's yoga, you know, whatever helps you kind of to relax and re-energize, those are the things that you really need to take the time to practice, because it helps you keep good professional boundaries.
Yes, that you cannot overstress that. I'm telling you, when you start getting to the point where you hate to see this person coming, or your shoulders are up to here, your earlobes, it's time to do something.
Absolutely.
When I was early in corrections, we had a supervisor who was like so good. She could look at you and tell, and she would say, "Get out of here, go to the park, take you an extra hour for lunch," because she could just read it on you, And we have to get to the point, like you said, where we can recognize that within ourselves, maintenance,
Absolutely.
self-maintenance, because otherwise you'll burn out, spin out, and you're no good for anybody.
That is so true. Monique?
In the mornings, I started incorporating a daily walk.
Oh,
Not
okay.
only for the clients, but it's for me as well. Because right before I start a group, we do
Okay.
a walk just to, gather my thoughts, get us together, as a group. And I think so far it's been working really well.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any good self-care activities?
Oh, well, okay, I know what she gonna say. I do journal.
Okay, you
I have
journal.
to, man. When it, and I might not do it every day,
Right.
but if something is really pressing on me, I journal and I go to that park,
Mm-hmm.
and I will go get on the treadmill,
Okay.
and I'm getting that sauna if my hair is not freshly done.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Those are great. You have any more, Laura?
I saw every Friday I go horseback riding.
Horseback riding.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I always love horses.
Wow.
I'm learning how to ride a horse.
How therapeutic are animals?
And I found a new place. It's called Darby's Acres. She has a zebra. She let us pet the pig Cheyenne. My daughter caught a pig in a bin. And she has everything. She's
Okay.
a rescue.
Rescue.
And
Okay.
plus she do horseback ride lessons.
And how
it's-
therapeutic are animals?
Oh my goodness! I helped a prairie dog, and he loves to be loved. And oh God, it's awesome.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
Absolutely. So those are really some really, really great ideas, but I think it's really, really important to have something and know a lot about yourself. You know, what do I need? We sometimes don't take enough time to explore our own selves so that we know who we are, so that when we're working with others, we know what we have to give. So it's really important to practice self-care. I think horses is a great way to do that. And definitely, riding, swimming, walking, those things that can kind of give you some energy so that you can give fully of yourself when you're working with another individual, which can be tough sometimes.
Ms. Yvonne, I went to yoga. I was taking yoga for like maybe 4, about a month.
Okay.
And I'm telling you right now, the first day when we went into the restoration booth, you don't know how much you're carrying and wearing until it starts coming out. And I cried like a baby. I hugged my trainer, and she was like, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes," because all tears aren't bad.
No.
But I appreciated her for walking me through the steps and helping me to release what was going on inside of me that I didn't know was there, but it was there, And so yoga was an excellent way to do that. And I'll just listen to the music sometime and meditate,
Okay.
and it
Absolutely.
is.
For me, there are days when I sit in my car for 30 minutes before I ever go into the office. I listen to prayer for at least an hour before I go to work. Because those are the things that I need to do to be centered so that I can work with the people who I work with every day. And sometimes it's not my clients, sometimes it's my staff or my colleagues that I kind of need some refuge from. So I just think it's really, really important for us to be able to do that. So when we're talking about professional boundaries, again, we want to make sure that ultimately, we do no harm. That's our first goal. Even when a client is with us and they make us feel really uncomfortable, if you have to get another colleague to help you, do so. I think that's important. We want to make sure that we share with them what our role is, what my role is as a counselor, what my role is as a supervisor, what my role is as your role is as the client. You want to clear those things up right in the beginning so that everybody in the room is very clear about what the interactions will be like. And I think that helps. We want to make sure that we're getting ongoing supervision. It is critically important to be able to touch base with, even if it's peer supervision, to touch base with your colleagues and your supervisors on a regular basis so that you are clear on what the ethics are and what you're bound to ethically and what you need to share and be responsible for. And again, I think one of the last important points is about self-care. Making sure that we are doing what we need to do as professionals so that we stay healthy, so that the people who we are working with get the best of us when they're with us.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our conversation for professional boundaries for today.